Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to our esteemed CEO panel for this event. This is the opening panel for the conference, and as the title suggests, it's a global panel on decarbonization, and we have a very diverse and also esteemed group of panelists joining me today to talk about Southeast Asia's energy transition and also what are the opportunities and challenges behind that. So without further ado, actually, I want to kick things off by giving my panelists an opportunity just to introduce themselves and to say a few words. So Linda, could we start with you, please?
Thank you, Justin. So my name is Linda Åse. I'm Executive Vice President of Electrification, Maintenance and Modifications in Aker Solutions. So, and I'm also a board member for several new energy companies. I've been in the energy industry for more than 20 years and worked in different regions globally, including Asia, Vietnam, India, South Korea, and China. And I'm really pleased to be on this panel session discussing a topic that is close to my heart, my green heart, and discussing low carbon and energy transition. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And Unai, over to you.
Justin, thank you very much. I'm Unai Pastor. I'm Vice President of Origination for Cheniere. I'm based in Singapore here. And I'm covering the region, including the ASEAN region that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to be kind of as well, as Cheniere being the largest US LNG exporter, I will be talking about the role of gas and LNG in this energy transition.
Thank you very much. Adimas, over to you.
Thank you, Justin. My name is Adimas Saleh. So I think I'm the only one in this panel that is from the regulatory side of things. So I've been in the oil and gas industry for 25 years now. So started with in Shell as a geophysicist for 14 years. After that, I moved to Petrom Brunei, which is a national oil company in Brunei, set up a geophysics department where I start going commercial and more leadership role. And before I joined the Petrom Authority, which is the organization that I'm in right now, I was in Myanmar as a country manager for PB Myanmar, which is a branch of Petrom Brunei. So what is basically the expectation that I hope to get, not just from this forum, but basically from the whole week kind of event, is basically this. As I said, we have been long in the, I've been long in the oil and gas industry. I think it's the realization comes in where we owe what we have right now actually to the future. And now I'm having 2 kids of growing age. I think this is an opportunity to basically to leave an impression by which we can make a change now. Yeah, and basically decarbonization is a way for us to contribute. And then the marathon for reversing the adverse effect of climate change, for me, it's a race by which you can only win if everybody ends at the same time. So I think this is an opportunity not just for regulator, but everybody involved to contribute, at least to give some thoughts on it. So that's basically my expectation. Back to you, Justin.
Thank you, Adimas. Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of points that we'll dive into a bit more detail during the panel. And then David, over to you.
Thank you, Justin. My name is David Griffin. I am the CEO and founder of Suncable. Suncable is developing a series of projects. Our marquee project is the Australia-ASEAN Power Link, which is to utilise an abundant resource, Australia's solar resource, to generate zero emissions electricity to serve Darwin and Singapore via high voltage direct current transmission links. We want that to be a first of a kind or that will be a first of a kind, but we want that, that concept to be a first of many. I've been involved in the renewable energy industry since 2000, developing a large number of utility scale wind and solar farms in Australia and South Africa. But really looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you, Justin.
Great, thank you very much, David. As you can see here, that we have actually a very interesting and diverse panel representing different companies and organizations, and also a regulator as well. So I think it should be a very good discussion ahead. Okay, well, let's get started. I think for many of you listening, and also those of you on this panel, if you've been attending this conference or other conferences, not only this year, but let's say throughout the years, we always talk about the energy transition. We always talk about how things are changing. So maybe if I take 1 minute just to say a few words to help us set the scene a little bit and get us started on our discussion. There's a couple interesting dimensions, right? One is always the question of what does an energy transition mean? If we probably think about the last 16 months, the pandemic is probably the biggest story that everybody thinks about. But at the same time, we know that actually the word net zero is becoming a bit more mainstream. So just one metric to measure that is that at the start of 2020, about 1/3 of global emissions were covered by some sort of net zero target announced by a particular country, mostly European countries. By the end of July, or just about a month or so ago, we're at above 70% of global emissions covered by some sort of net zero discussion. Again, mostly set by countries. Obviously in Southeast Asia specifically, no country or no regulator has explicitly said or set any sort of net zero goal, although some companies have done this. So that's something that I think is sort of interesting to observe. At the same time, we observe that investment in renewable energy, for instance, has been accelerating in Southeast Asia. So for instance, in 2019, that number was less than was sort of less than $9 billion globally, but sorry, in Southeast Asia. But actually in 2020, this number almost jumped to about $20 billion. So Southeast Asia has seen actually a fairly significant increase in clean energy investment as well. So there's a lot of trends happening, and it almost feels like in some ways that things have been moving very quickly globally. Things are moving quickly in Southeast Asia as well, but it's always a little bit slower than some other parts of the world, at least for the way that some observers see it. So actually my first question, and that I want to pose to all of you is, when you think about the energy transition in Southeast Asia, what is your perspective of it in terms of where it is right now and how things are moving? So Adimas, actually, as the only regulator on the panel and representing an ASEAN country, perhaps I'll ask you to comment on this question first. In terms of when you think about the energy transition, what does that mean for you in Southeast Asia right now?
If you can bring slide number 4. My slides. Do you have it handy with you?
Okay, here we go. Yep. Yeah,
this is basically showing what is Asian primary energy consumption breakdown by fuel. I mean, probably not specifically for Brunei, but for ASEAN region, as you can see over there, the reliance on coal is still quite significant, yeah. And I mean, we are part of this ASEAN CCUS. EFOC, which is part of the co-organization in ASEAN, trying to implement things like clean coal technology. But unfortunately, it's a bit slow. I mean, we have to accept that. But another thing that is really kind of like significant as well is the role of the mix is basically very, very varied. I mean, most of the times, like originally we are traditionally diesel and coal. Now we are seeing sources right now from hydro, solar, and obviously gas. So transition for us, depending upon who you ask. If you ask like for the lack of gas-rich nations by which they can export, transition probably is, at least in the medium term, is utilization of LNG and gas as a far more cleaner fuel. Obviously, at the end, we want to go for renewable. Yeah. However, they have, of course, the cost limitation. There is a issue of cost. There's also the question of kind of like maturity of technologies into renewable for it to be implemented might take a long time. So traditional wise, gas will be really, really important. But I want to highlight one real issue here in ASEAN specifically. Energy transition is good, but energy excess. So in effort for ASEAN to diversify its fuel sources, to ensure energy security and to reduce carbon emission, we need to make sure that energy security and distribution of energy is accessible to all, to make sure our journey, nobody is left behind. Yeah. Further compounded with our geography with many hard to reach isolated places, meaning islands and untouched habitats, a distribution energy using existing or new solution will have to be part of the plan of us going forward. So I think in terms of transition is basically twofold here. Like we need to ensure the future by which it will help to mitigate the issue of the adverse effect of climate change, but also to increase basically energy access throughout the region. So at least from a regulator point of view, I think that is one of the primary thing, in addition to, of course, the usual thing of the doubling of our energy demand need in Asia that has been double, like expected to double like by 2050 compared to 2017. So it's really, yeah, so it's really quite significant for us to catch up. But as I said, it's energy access is probably one of the things that have to be put in the mix. Back to you, Justin.
Thank you, Dimas. Yeah, I think you raised a couple of very interesting points and certainly present a perspective of energy transition from Southeast Asia, sort of countries in the region. Unai, maybe I'll come to you next. I understand from, Dimas mentioned gas, the increase of gas demand in the region, and also energy access. From what I know, Cheniere has been doing relatively well, I think, in the region. Recently, you've seen growth and a lot of interest in LNG. Can you just tell us a little more about that, and also from your perspective, when you think about the energy transition in Southeast Asia, how do you see that? What is the opportunity that you see there?
Sure. Yes, I guess from our side, we haven't necessarily seen that slowdown pace that you mentioned before. As a context, we are currently producing somewhere around 40 to 45 million tons of LNG out of the United States. We are the second largest LNG operator in the world. And for context, somewhere, I guess, year to date, we have delivered somewhere around 40 to 45% of our production went to Asia overall, not necessarily Southeast Asia. So we are paying a lot of attention to the overall region, and we are paying a lot of attention to Southeast Asia. Some of the so for LNG and for gas to be able to piece into this energy transition, I think it's very important, right? We hear and we understand messages like Adimas and seeing how coal still plays a role in base load generation in the region, and that's something that somehow we believe is an opportunity for LNG today to come and replace. It is very clear the benefits of the GHG reduction in terms of kilowatt hour produced. So that's one of the prompt
Sure. Unai, maybe one quick follow-up question. You mentioned that LNG will be 4 times growth in Southeast Asia, I think by 2050 or next 30 years
40.
or so. 40, okay, next 20 years or so. Do you see the role of LNG changing? Is it sort of, in the power sector that you see the demand is rising in industry? Do you see that change, the demand changing, or is it sort of, I guess 4x means it's sort of across the board?
Sorry, you asking whether the role of gas will evolve, or whether the demand for that gas will be evolving over time? Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think sort of both ways. So in terms of where I think, yeah, one question I think is role of gas in the for energy overall in Southeast Asia, but also where demand for gas will come from, right? Is it in terms of in the power industry? Is it just because there is so much coal to gas switching? Where do you see that? What is the demand driver for that to account for that 4x?
Yeah, so I guess the energy trilemma in this part of the world is slightly different than in more kind of advanced economies. I think we see in growth, we see in depleting reserves, and we're hoping to see more coal to gas switch. That as well, we're hoping that over time, that not necessarily continue being the role of gas, but perhaps that role evolving to kind of supporting renewables going forward, right? So that's where the demand comes from, and that's how the role of gas or LNG should kind of evolve as well over time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Linda, let me come to you, and I'll ask you a question, but feel free to take it in a different direction if you like. Maybe from your company's perspective, Acure, what do you see what does an energy transition in Southeast Asia mean, but also what sort of opportunities you see coming out of that for you?
I think it's already mentioned by several of the panel participants here that it is a transition that is in several dimensions in a way. So it's you have the one that is a fact that oil and gas will still be here, probably for decades, and the transition means that we will have to lower the carbon emission while we are producing the oil and gas. So that is one dimension of the transition. And on the other dimension is that how can we use our competency in the oil and gas to transform into other renewable markets and products. And I think will rely to where my company stands today in Aker Solutions. We are really transforming based on our identity, which is coming from oil and gas. And we have our competency. We have more than 10,000 people working in oil and gas. And how can we make that lift to make sure that they can support the transition? And then on the other hand, to be able to develop new technology into renewables like wind, solar, carbon capture facilities. So I think the transition has maybe for so far, due to maybe the pandemic situation being slower in the ASEAN than in other places, but it will come. And I think Adima said it very well. It is happening now, and we can make a change now. So it's not too late, and we should share our experiences from what has been happening in other places of the world now into the ASEAN countries. And we have a large, in Aker Solutions, large operation in Brunei, taking care of modification and maintenance for more than 200 assets for BSP. So we are really present in the region. We also have a subsea manufacturing center in Malaysia, and also engineering team, which will be local competency transfer into the region. So it's one thing being present in the region with local creating jobs, but on the other side also be able to transform and transfer competency and knowledge from other places in the world where we have our global operations. So I think it's same but different. So maybe a bit slower in the ASEAN at the moment, but it will come, and we are here now.
Thank you. Maybe just to ask you a little more about that. If you look at your business operations or opportunities in Europe versus what you're saying in Asia, what would say are some of the main differences between the two in terms of business opportunities or even business activities you have today?
So it may be from the technology side that I think in the European part, or at least the Norwegian continental shelf, where we have our main activities, we have been working a lot on decarbonization for many years. And now it is the electrification which is standing out as one important way of decarbonizing the oil and gas, which may be not the same solution in ASEAN because of our access to clean renewable energy to serve the oil and gas assets with. But I think the technology can be transported and be used in other access and other verticals in ASEAN. So I think even though there are differences in technology and the way we use it, I think the main thing is that we should build on our competency that has been developed for years, and it has to be local. So it has to create jobs. So we cannot go into this transformation missing the opportunities of creating jobs in Asia and really make a difference in that context. I think that's the sustainable way of making a transition here. One of the sustainable access, and of course, including the climate perspective, but we should also be sustainable from a business point of view. So it should add value to the region. I'm not sure if I answered specifically, but a little bit. Yeah.
I think that was good. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, maybe we'll follow up with that point a little more a bit later. But thanks for the response on that. David, if I may come to you, could you maybe tell us a little more about actually Sun Cable, and also again your view on let's say what the energy transition in ASEAN as you understand it, and how do you see that as an opportunity from your perspective?
Sure. I think that the most profound change that has happened over the last 12 months in ASEAN is the level of awareness that there's a major shift coming. So you could argue that ASEAN is a bit behind the global energy transition, but our view is that the level of awareness of the change that is coming is now a lot higher than it has been, than say 12 months ago. And I guess I point to matters such as CBAMs, the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and so the EU's development of a carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and the suggestions of countries such as the UK, Japan, South Korea, Canada, China, potentially the United States, all developing similar structures. means that any nation that is an exporting nation is going to suddenly have a very strong focus on what level of embedded emissions they have in their exported products. So that is driving a renewed level of interest in reducing emissions through in the manufacturing sector in particular, but really across the board. So we also see the level of change coming through signals from capital allocation. There's been quite a few announcements from multilateral agencies in terms of withdrawing funds for future fossil fuel investment and enhancing their level of support for zero emission generation sources. So that's a major change, which obviously will take time to play out, but that's a very significant driver of change. Meanwhile, the cost of zero emissions related technology is continuing to fall. And at the generation source, your solar, offshore wind, or storage technologies, they're all following an extremely a revolutionary level of technological development and a matching reduction in price that goes with that. Some of the other facilitating technologies that enable large-scale deployment of renewables, that's improving in capability as well. So that's all enhancing the story for a rapid shift through the 2020s. One thing we've noticed is that the number of companies that, large emitting companies that now utilise an internal carbon price continues to grow pretty rapidly. And that is really a strong signal of where the market believes we're going to end up in the short to medium term. And I guess the final pull force is that is the level of corporate demand for zero emissions electricity supply in particular. There's well-known industries such as data centers where they probably started the shift to having a zero emissions profile, and all the big names in that industry, Google, Microsoft, etc. They all have zero emission targets, and their operations in Southeast Asia are one of the harder areas to achieve those targets. So they've really got to work hard to find those zero emission sources. So there's a lot of pull factors in terms of making that change, and then there's companies such as Sun Cable, we're focused on delivering gigawatt scale generation sources and transmission systems that enable very large scale supply so that we can get this transition done in a big way before 2030.
The sort of the pull factors that you mentioned, David, I mean, which one of those do you think is most relevant for Southeast Asia, or would you say sort of everything is quite relevant for the region?
I think capital allocation is probably always going. No money, you don't have the money, you can't make the change. So I think the shift in lending practices and allocations between fossil fuel-based activities and zero emissions sources, that's a really material shift, and it does take a little time for that to wash through. But that's, if I had to pick one, I'd say that's probably the most important.
And maybe one more follow-up question. You mentioned gigawatt scale. Sort of delivered in Southeast Asia. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Sure. So, as I said in the introduction, our marquee project, Australia, that's designed to dispatch 3.2 gigawatts of capacity, which will be dispatched to Darwin and Singapore. But well, if we look at it from a resource perspective, if we take Australia as an example, Australia receives 58 million petajoules of solar radiation every year. Last year, we used 400 of those petajoules for electricity. 58 million petajoules, and we used 400. So from that perspective, the solar industry has barely begun. It's an absolutely staggeringly large resource. And meanwhile, there's massive populations throughout ASEAN and the broader region. Loads are growing, and electricity's share of energy is growing faster than the rate of energy demand is growing, and that's a very significant shift, which is great because it helps to actually achieve everyone's target, I guess, of getting down to zero emissions. It's a lot easier to do that when electricity's share is bigger. There's large loads. There is places like Central Australia with massive resources, but those abundant renewable energy resources are not evenly spread across the region. So there's really a need to be able to target where that resource is abundant and find efficient ways to transmit that from the resource to the loads. But fortunately, we're in a position now where the technology, that transmission technology, has really come of age.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. Ademus, maybe I'll come back to you and ask you a question. I know you're sort of speaking from a regulator's perspective, but maybe I ask you something about companies as well. As you know, there's a we talked a little bit about the energy transition in Southeast Asia and sort of what that means, right? And I think the panel overall feels that yes, there's a transition to lower carbon sources, but there's also more, there's sort of more of everything we need: renewables, oil and gas. There's sort of more of everything in a growing market. We have heard that some companies in Southeast Asia are setting net zero emissions goals. We're starting to do that. Do you think that this is a trend that will continue? Do you see that more companies, more energy companies, especially in Southeast Asia, are going to set some of these more ambitious goals, or not really? It's more of a gradual transition that we're looking at.
I think they do. I think I just want to echo back what David just said just now in terms of like not just in terms of like statement of like they're gonna have a zero emission goal, but also there is a driver from the market perspective by which they require like the product that they're buying from has to be of the nature that is kind of like complementing whatever they are promoting. So if the company that is buying like the fuel has a zero carbon emission, obviously the product that they're gonna get in will have to comply to that one in order to kind of like to really follow up what they are trying to do. But it's kind of like in terms of the pace, probably I agree with some of the statement. In Asia, not just in ASEAN, but in Asia perhaps it's not as fast due to various reasons such as the availability of other sources and whatever. But for me, the primary reason for this is basically you can see it in terms of like the 5 different ways, 5 different things that need to have in order to have a foothold of decarbonization within ASEAN. First one is in terms of development of responsive regulations. It's not very kind of uniform, like everybody some a little bit behind in ASEAN. So there are more kind of like commonness in terms of like regulations. Of course, the region will help definitely. And then it's quite interesting. It was mentioned earlier in terms of economic, in terms of capital allocation shift. that is something that is really, really interesting for us in ASEAN, by which economic framework and development of investment incentives is yet to be done. The reason I say that it's interesting because like it's probably among the most challenging of all the frameworks when the reason being like in terms of like the nature of the product itself, especially in terms of renewables, it's the uncertainty in terms of like the forecast, and that's basically hard for us to come up with for business planning and stuff like that. Obviously, the developing capacity, including infrastructure, is what we want to bring via all the companies, obviously, and that's something that they will come if the economic framework, development, and investment incentive are sorted. And the last two, which I think Linda mentioned it quite nicely just now. First one is basically in terms of like skill identification, development, and workforce planning, in terms of transferring like let's say existing oil and gas worker into more renewables type of business. So that transition also probably in terms of the business is also something not that very common in this region. And then obviously the last one is innovation, research and development. So that's something that we always want to bring, especially if you want to localize some of the innovation, by which for whatever reason, such as like kind of like intellectual property kind of related issues can be mitigated if can be developed locally. So to go back, sorry, it's a bit tangent away from your question, Justin. But the thing is, yes, it's market driven, just like the rest of the world. Like if the market demands it, the company will transition. And then there's also regulatory requirement, as I said, like if there's regulation coming in, then obviously they have to change. Like just to give an example, in Brunei, like we have our Brunei climate change policy set up last year. So that's in terms of curbing like emissions and stuff like that. So with that coming in, obviously the companies working in Brunei have to follow up with that kind of things. But just to put it simply, it's really much a kind of market driven and also the regulatory, but it can only be enabled if we have the economic framework and development of investment incentive to be sorted in this region. That's my input for that one.
Thank you, Dimas, for your views, sharing your views on that. Unai, maybe I come back to you on this. You know, in the last under a year, we had 3 sort of countries in North Asia set net zero goals about their 30 or 40 years in the future, and they, do you sort of see? I guess the question would be, do you sort of see potentially this happening in Southeast Asia, and do you see this as a potential threat to the business?
Sure, we don't expect necessarily Southeast Asia perhaps to miss this whole thing, right? As some of the panelists have pointed, maybe the progress feels slightly behind. I don't think Southeast Asia perhaps is behind. What I think is it is a much more difficult equation to solve once you don't have you have a growth in addition to optimizing the energy sources that you have today, right? So what we probably see, as you probably mentioned as well in your openings, we've seen a lot of investment increasing in renewables in Southeast Asia over the last year versus the year before. We've seen a big efforts in trying to obtain less or more cleaner fuels into the energy mix. And I'm not so sure, like, if I see it as a threat. What I do think as well is an opportunity for the oil and gas industry to make sure that that we continue doing our business on the best way that we know how to do it. And in terms of gas, I think it's an opportunity for the gas players and the LNG player to demonstrate the role that the gas gonna have in the energy transition, right? And back to your comment or to your question before, I think we already seen the LNG industry doing efforts when it comes to efficiently operate the facilities, or even kind of offsetting some of the emissions. So I'm going to give you an example of what we have done from Cheniere. I think from Cheniere, we believe that perhaps offset is something that it will be a market-driven activity, if you would like to. It will be the customers, or our final customers, or even our potential buyers to decide what they're going to do with the LNG that they purchase, and what they're going to do with the carbon footprint associated to it. But I think as an industry player, as a large operator of a gas facility, what we're doing is focusing on quantifying and measuring all our activities associated to our LNG, right? So we announced, for example, that starting from next year, associated with all of our cargoes, we will start providing a report that effectively will tell you what is the carbon footprint associated to that cargo. Now, that we believe that the first step to eventually reducing, right, and to make sure that we kind of do this in a transparent way, and effectively with the purpose and with the goal of reducing it, and or measuring as well in a way that is transparent, and kind of put science, if you like, to put a very clear and transparent methodology in front of everybody, for everybody to kind of see and to understand the benefits. I think in this panel, we are saying kind of we all kind of pointing towards the same direction. I think renewables will be getting more and more relevant over time. And I think if the gas industry or the oil gas industry wants to continue having a role going forward, we need to make sure that more than ever, we run our assets in a way that everybody is very comfortable with. The same way that mining will need to as well continue to be done in a way that somehow provide more transparency on how certain materials are getting extracted or whatever, right? So I think for the good of overall, and for a global kind of a good, I think industries, oil and gas, LNG, or even mining, or all kind of industries will need to operate in a much more environmental, climate responsible way for us to have a role going forward, right?
Sure. Thank you for that. And I think that's a really good point. If I may actually ask you one follow-up question, just as maybe maybe a little specific, but I think there might be some interest within the audience on that. You know, we hear a little bit about LNG, sort of carbon free LNG cargoes, and there's growing interest in that, particularly in Southeast Asia. Can you maybe say a few words about maybe what that is, but also what your view of that sort of opportunity is?
Sure. I briefly mentioned that I think that whenever it comes from LNG players, I think the main focus should be on measuring and reducing, and somehow offset should come a secondary role, if you would like to, right? Now, to the extent that the players and buyers see that offsetting the carbon emissions associated to the LNG consumption plays a role going forward for them, I think it's another tool on the whole toolkit as well, right? Now, we need to be as well aware that somehow there is not enough carbon offset for the whole CO2 that we emit to the atmosphere. So I think as well need to be a recognition that everybody needs to make sure that they run their business in an efficient way. Everybody needs to run their business in a climate, environmental way. And once you have the remaining of the harder to abate emissions, that's probably when the carbon offset can be better utilized. But yeah, definitely LNG offsets have been something very used and highly talked about in the prior months. So we hope that as well it's good to see those other tools being developed and being studied and being perfection as well.
Great, thank you, Unai, for that. Linda, let me come to you and maybe ask you this question, but from a slightly different angle. So you mentioned that your company Aker was, originated in oil and gas services, but you found new opportunities in sort of the energy transition or in the low carbon transition. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe the broader context here is sort of for oil and gas companies in general. What's a way they can stay agile, for instance, in the energy transition, and what are new opportunities they can potentially seek?
I think first of all, I think I mentioned this really commitment to the identity. So what are we really going to do? How are we going to make a difference? So we have been working from an organizational point of view with setting the direction for the company and being very clear on where we are going. So meaning that we are building on the competency and the knowledge we have into the new investments that we are doing. And I would just mention, when it comes to if we are going to work on the carbon reduction agenda or not from a company point of view, there is no way out, because it's already mentioned, investor will not spend any time or money on companies not having a clear agenda with reducing their own CO2 emission and how they are going to contribute in the transformation. And it has to be a top-down approach, setting clear targets, but also making sure that we get each and one of the people into it. So this is about having the hearts and mind into lowering, finding good solutions, thinking smarter, more efficient with a lower carbon footprint. So that's one side of it. And then I think one aspect into the transition that will also, and is already a game changer, is digitalization. So because we cannot make this transition happening without being one digital in all we do, and to use the opportunity to develop digital solutions, technology, digital twins, many aspects around that, and use the data. It was mentioned data center here. It will be many of those around the world, I'm sure, because we will have to use data in a different way. And we have to collaborate more across borders. So I think it's so many dimensions in how we are going to transform. And again, in our company, we are really then having the fundament of the people we have. Then we have to add in competency and use the technology available from partners or develop it ourselves. It's a technology program we need, but it's not necessarily all coming out of Aker Solutions, but we need to partner up with the relevant technology partners. So it's many things. It's collaboration, it's digitalization, it's technology development, and it's build on the back of the oil and gas competency. So we are in the midstream of this, but again, digitalization will be the game changer here.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, I mean, you mentioned digitalization. Is that something that's relatively, would you say is relatively a new business area for you, or is something that, how do you sort of see that expand?
Well, it's I would say it's not new, but it has been increasingly accelerating the speed of development within technology, and maybe also we see. In the pandemic situation, it has been extremely accelerating how we are using tools like Teams and Zooms and how we are collaborating. But I think it has been, we have been using digitalization as one of the competitive edges in the past, but it will be much more dominating now. So like I said, digital twin, meaning that we are really understanding the assets that we are working on and have all the data that is driving the integrity of the components, the equipment, and the total asset. That will be the same, either it's a windmill or a solar setup, or it's a oil and gas setup. So that's one part of it. And then it's collaborating in new ways. So, and that is meaning trust. So how can we have trustful long-term partnerships that's really open up of sharing data in a different way? And again, I think that open up an ocean of opportunity for combining or connecting what's going on in other parts of the world with the ASEAN part of the world, the digitalization here. And also talking about how can we share energy. I think without a digital solution, high-tech digital solution, we are not able to be as energy efficient as we can. So it's so many aspects of this.
Thank you, Linda, for that. Maybe just to switch gears a little bit. I think aside from yourselves, but maybe most of the audience is in some ways trying to find business opportunities in the region, in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. And often there's a wish list when people look for business opportunities, right? Whether it's money or policy or infrastructure opportunity, could be anything. I'm curious to hear what your wish list is, or what are some things that you may want to see. So if I were to pose the question, for instance, say, what is something that you would like to see in the region, in Southeast Asia, that will help you, advance your business or your goals? What would that be? And maybe from the answer you give, we can probe a little bit more into what that means. So David, maybe I'll start with you on that.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Actually, Unai touched on this earlier. I think he made a really good point that when companies are looking to reduce their emissions, the first thing they should do is to look to reduce their own emissions through smarter operations, and whatever the leftover is, that's where the role of offsetting probably comes in. Carbon offsetting comes in. One of the challenges, and Unai also made the very important point that there is really there's a somewhat finite limit to how far offsetting can go. If you're looking at offsets derived from the natural environment, we've seen, if we can take California, for example, there's a lot of carbon offsetting involved in Californian forests. And sensibly, that program has insurance pools of additional forests just to account for forest fires and the like. But the level of forest fires they're encountering in California at the moment is unprecedented and burning through that insurance pool. Where I'm going with this is that there isn't a standardized global standard for addressing carbon offsets and calculating those offsets. So it does, where people are trying to, they need to use offsets as part of their business. People are at a disadvantage because there isn't a standard to be used across the globe. So within ASEAN, or ideally across the globe, if there was a standard, an agreed standard for counting carbon offsets, that would be a major step forward, I think. It's going to be an important part of the whole energy transition and the path to zero emissions. It really needs to be done on a standardized way so that everybody knows exactly what that carbon offset equates to.
Oh, I want to ask Unai to respond to that, but before I do, what might be one or two things that you would like to see as a standard for carbon offsets?
It's a complex area because many of those carbon offsets come from biodiversity offsets, so the natural world. So how do you count the carbon in a forest? Is it a temperate forest or a rainforest? There's so many variables. It's a really complex area. And if you then look at counting soil carbon, it probably becomes more complex than counting carbon above ground, because there are so many impacts that can rapidly change the nature of that soil, mostly human impacts and the like. So I'm not an expert on calculating those offsets, but I do recognise it's a very complex area. And it's probably always going to be somewhat imprecise. but the level of error in it at the moment is potentially way too big, and that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Unai, I'll let you comment on the offsets point and whether that's something that you like to see. And obviously you mentioned that earlier. And also the same question to you as well about the wish list, if you will.
Sure. I mean, I don't think there is much to comment to that statement. I think if we assume that we need to assume that the carbon offset is not taking shortcuts, right? We need to make sure that this is calculated, or this needs to be used in a proper way. And yes, the industry has recently taken off on this front, and we're seeing little by little kind of progress. I think I mentioned before, yes, we need to make sure we perfectionate this to the point that the error gets minimized. If we start looking this as a way to cheat the system, is completely fitting the purpose, right? It needs to be make sure that there is completely standardized, or to the extent that is possible is standardized, and we need to make sure that players, whenever they go and offset the cargoes, they are comfortable to what they're doing. I mean, the reputational risk is huge, and I hope everybody sees it that way. And I don't think I disagree on anything of what David has said. So yeah, totally. We need to make sure eventually, once the markets evolve, this needs to get to those points that you said, right? Minimum error, transparency, and make sure it accounts for that. It's probably a difficult kind of a problem to solve? Maybe, but I do think like we have solved more complicated equations as a globally. So I'm pretty sure we will figure out a way to kind of calculate everything in a way that everybody's comfortable with the errors and with the mistakes, and as well adding insurances and things like that. So yeah, pretty good with that. And the other question is wish list for.
Yeah, I think getting back to my original question that David mentioned carbon offsets, but just in terms of a wish list that would be great for your business or your perspective, something that you would like to see in the region take place.
I'm like to kind of be okay, or be grateful to what we have, and I think the ingredients that the region has are pretty good, right? It's a huge young population, well prepared, with a huge need for energy, and I think already very well aware and very well ready to kind of take on board all the challenges that the energy transition will bring. So yeah, I don't think if I will ask more, I think I will be spoiled. I think those are the right ingredients, right?
I wonder, maybe just to push a little bit on that, but I wonder, is there something that would make things go quicker, right? For, let's say, accelerate demand. Is it infrastructure? Is it financing of infrastructure? Is there something you think that would make, the fundamentals, I think, we fully agree that it's going well, but is there something you think that would actually make it go quicker?
Sure, we could look at country by country, and I could probably kind of pinpoint like a couple of bottlenecks on every single country associated to their own characteristics, right? But overall, I think it's as well a complicated solution, and it's a solution that once you decide the way forward, it's gonna stay for a while. It's not decisions that are easy to turn around and change your mind, right? So I think we would like to see more gas running base load instead of coal, for sure, right? We will be like to see a more penetrations of renewables in some of these economies, for sure. But again, we understand that these are decisions that take time, and we cannot ignore COVID, right? So we would like to see business growing faster, but I think there is the consequences of COVID in these markets have been very impactful. So we cannot keep that human aspect aside and wish for more business. We need to make sure that we kind of we are here. I think everybody in this panel and everybody in the industry is here to find a medium-term, long-term solution. So I think we should be okay to kind of manage those kind of up and downs on the pace of economies that are already doing very well. So I really, back to my point, I think it has all the ingredients, and if it's not fast enough, I think we can all kind of make sure we step down and maybe kind of how do you say, take a step back to jump forward or something like that. So probably that's something how we describe the situation now.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a very optimistic view, which is welcome. That's great. Thank you. Adimas, coming to you. I mean, are there things that you like to? Well, I think you have a perspective also within within the region as well. But are there things that you like to see? In terms of making your life or the work of your organization easier?
I think it's more as a regulator, what we try to be most of the time, probably not often people thought it like that, but we wish to be enablers, you see, for all these activities. And my wish list is basically, for a start, for within this region, we have a proper, well set up decarbonization framework, basically the one that I mentioned earlier, the 5, including the regulations and all that. But in terms of like what I wish that we can settle first, I think it's basically the thing about the economic framework development and investment incentive. So I think it's best to be done collaboratively within ASEAN members, because the last thing that we want to do is basically to provide unnecessary challenges that will slow down implementation in the region. Yeah. So if coming up with a business model in particular, it's challenging, as I said, due to the uncertainty of the forecast. But the thing is, like with this framework, right? We wish to have an environment that is still supportive in the decarbonization effort. Well, at least not stopping progress in the decarbonization implementation. Yeah. So the wish list for us is, as a regulator, is basically to get that framework sorted, and then have that, once that framework is sorted, and especially prioritized in attracting kind of like companies to come to our respective countries to bring in all the good stuff that that is needed, then that's basically job done for us, at least from that perspective as a regulator. So yeah, so just bring it in. I mean, like we have companies in this panel that thank you, for example, ACA, we know ACA very, very well, like in Brunei. But yeah, so like we invite companies to look at ASEAN to be exact. Then we are kind of like open right now in terms of like the way we can improve the way we do things. The good thing about not having a framework yet, probably, it's we can bypass all the mistakes that has been done, and then go straight to all the learnings that other countries have, and then make sure that I think we are all set basically to reach what we want to get of decarbonization in ASEAN.
Okay, Dimas, thank you very much for that. Linda, maybe over to you. I mean, I think you mentioned before already a lot of opportunities that you've seen in the region, and you know how things have, yeah, I mean, quite a few things actually. But are there anything else on the wish list for you that you like to see?
Well, I think Adima said it very well. We cannot do this alone. So building an ecosystem in the regions that can support and work together on the transition. And then one wish list is on the wish list is that the universities and the schools need to be prepared for ramping up to be able to support what's needed from a competency level. Because again, this is local business. We need local knowledge. We need young, fresh students coming in, eager to solve our challenges. So I think that is something that would really help to work through that axis by supporting and building the flow of new students and well-educated people in. So, and again, long-term partnership is one of the key solutions when we are going into going into new regions. And like we did in Brunei, we started with, I think, 100 people coming from Norway and ending now up with the opposite. It is almost 90% of all our people in Brunei, we have in our business in Brunei, is local. And this is the way we want it. So, and I really want to send the 10% home, because it's local business. It should be generated value locally. So I think that's it. And be curious on the digitalization part. That will be crucial. And again, back to the universities, be fit for fight, and they are. So I think what Unai said, that it is a laboratory here, it's an ocean of opportunities that is ready to be used in this extremely interesting region. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes, or 2 or 3 minutes left. So not a lot of time, but I do want to maybe just go around to the 4 of you one final time. Just bear in mind, I think we're the opening panel, so there's probably quite a few discussions that will happen later on. So is there anything, and let's go around. So is there anything that we did not talk about, we missed, that you might want to mention? You don't need to talk through it. Probably won't have time to talk through the whole thing, but maybe we can sort of throw that, throw that thought down the line to the rest of the event for other sessions, or for the audience to think about throughout the event. So anything you think that we didn't really cover that you want to just bring up? David, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think, and obviously I'm biased towards electricity transmission networks and the like. But if you think of, if you compare the ASEAN nations and the neighbours with Europe, it's not a terribly dissimilar number of countries, but the level of interconnectedness within Europe is amazing. And there's huge benefits that European nations gain from that in terms of efficient generation of electricity and the like, and opening up opportunities for the transmission of electricity from regions where there's abundant renewables to areas where the demand is high, but they don't have that renewable resource. And in fact, as an example, where Linda is in Norway, obviously abundant hydro, numerous interconnectors already exist at the moment to transmit that electricity to the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe and the like. But all of that has been enabled because of policies and regulations that have been agreed between the various grids. And the ASEAN power grid has been a concept that's been on the table for some time. If ASEAN's really to gain the benefit of lower cost electricity and zero emissions electricity, it needs to enable greater interconnection between the various nations' grids to make that happen.
ASEAN power grid sounds like a good wish list item. So that's
true. I should have thought of that earlier. Yeah.
Okay, Unai, anything you think we didn't mention or get to that you would like to bring up?
No, I think I'd leave it at that.
Okay, Unai, anything from your side you would like to bring up that we haven't mentioned?
No, I think we cover a very different set of topics. I think I'm appreciative of the different kind of background that everybody brought, and somehow how kind of make sure that all the stories being delivered from different point of view. So thanks, Justin.
Thank you for that. Dimas, anything from your side?
2 words: hydrogen economy.
I think that's worth a couple of conferences, not
Yes.
just a panel. Okay, great. Well, maybe next time, or I think actually probably one of the subsequent sessions we'll pick up on that. Great. And Linda, anything from your side as a final word?
No, I think I'm very pleased. So it was a pleasure to meet you all. So I've learned a lot during this panel discussion. So thank you. So I think we covered a lot of interesting topics. So very well, of course, orchestrated. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think our time's up, but I want to just thank the four of you for joining us today. It's not an easy topic, and there's a lot of things obviously to cover and to talk about, but hopefully we've done a decent job of touching on different themes that will give the audience and also the subsequent panels some food for thought for the rest of the event. So thank you all very much for joining me and also for joining this panel, and wish you all a great rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you.